Hi everyone, welcome to Poetry and Talk. Poetry and Talk is a new online interviewing platform for poets to share their poetry, background, and inspiration. We're so grateful that you've checked in with us today. We have a new poet to introduce you to. Before we get to meet our guest poet, we'd just like to thank all the poets that have contacted us for a poet interview. If you've contacted us and you haven't heard from us yet, please know we're scheduling as fast as we can, and we'll get back to you as soon as possible for scheduling and with information. If you're watching this and you are a poet and you're interested in being interviewed with us, you can send an email to us at poetryandtalk@gmail.com. Again, thank you so much for watching. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Poetry and Talk. We're going to get ready to dive into our guest poet, Melantha. You can check us out on Facebook and stay connected with us with new poet interviews on Poetry and Talk. Please like and share. All right, let's go ahead and welcome our guest poet. Hi, Melantha, how are you?
Hi, I'm up and down, but that's the waves of life, isn't it?
Yes.
I have a poem that I would like to share, if that's all right.
Yes, absolutely, please.
It's called Individuals Together. Also, excuse my cat in the background. I am but a killer of we and all. See the fallacy of I and me. We be the possibility of growth. Myself spreads, bringing limitations for all. Timidity of others, encouraged by a self-system. Elites control this, it benefits them. Together decrypt through unsung whispers. Without each other, shells of us remain. Myths of congregations, seated by nobody. Closely all, despite the miles apart. Through souls and minds we may come, as one potentiality for inner peace. United, we can expand alternative roads. With our voices, harmonies of vibrations may come. Collectively, we are improved by each other. All rise to unity's call. Thank you.
Thank you, Melantha. That was wonderful. Can you elaborate on this and give us a little more insight into what this poem is all about?
Of course. So that poem is called Individuals Together. And that poem was made when I was 15. And it's all about basically how I feel as though as a system and as a race, the human race, we are more disconnected than ever. We may have technology and we may be able to express ourselves in so many different ways. But it seems to me that our community and our local groups are depleting. And so I wanted to share that through that poem.
Okay, this observation that you've made, when did you make this observation?
I made this observation probably as my mother was quite ill, so when I was 10. I noticed that my family wasn't really there for me and there wasn't a lot of community support. And whenever someone else was in distress and I would try to help them, they would either push me away or say, "You're not helping." And though it was traumatizing, I definitely have realized that community is quite lacking, at least in England, because that's where I come from.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and you mentioned that you wrote this when you were 15?
Yes, I wrote this when I was 15.
Okay, and that experience with your mom was when you were 10?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so there was a 5-year span. During that 5-year span, based on the situation that you were expressing with your mom, when did the inspiration come to you that you wanted to write about this? Like how did this whole thing come together? Because we have some background on it, and then we heard the poem. So during that kind of weaving of time, how did this all come about? Could you elaborate on that, please?
Of course. So When I was younger, I used to write a lot of songs, as very much a songwriter. And the writing was inspired probably from my parents, as they used to very much give me praise and very much enjoy my writing. So that's why I started writing originally, but it was songwriting. The reason why I started going into poetry is because I prefer the fluidity of it. As someone that enjoys mostly rhyme in my poems and in my songs, I found that it was easier to flow and to get a grasp of the poem. And the reason why it took me so long is because I was trying to deal with my trauma, probably. Thinking about it, considering I was so young, and though my mum is alive now, it was like a 9-month slog of wishing she was home already. So it was quite painful and quite distressing as a 10-year-old who also, as I've only recently found, has autism. So that also makes my processing different. And as a result, it took me longer to be able to come to terms with everything. And though I am still quite young now, I'm 17, I'm still getting to grips with how traumatizing that event was.
Mhm,
And thus the poem slowly came and was configured, and now it's on paper.
mhm. And did you find that this poetry helped you um, to handle the situation, or just to come to terms with it? How was this poem in relationship to that experience healing for you, or not, or continuing with the process?
Well, I find poetry to be a mix of things, depending on the subject and depending on how connected and deeply rooted it is for me. So during this situation in particular, I found it quite healing. And that healing process, it took me a while to write that poem. It took me at least a couple weeks to a couple days. I don't exactly know how long it took because it was over 2 years ago when I wrote that. And though everything has been so drastic nowadays, especially with issues recently, poetry has always been, for me, an outlet. And that probably stems from like taking it out of you, manifesting the words and manifesting the feelings and then putting onto paper. And then seeing that paper and actually realizing I'm going through this, but I'm managing, I'm doing this. And I believe that's a great strength for me and for others who do it.
Hmm. Do you find that each time you go back to this same poem, you feel differently?
No, I've always felt the same during that poem. It
Mhm.
reminds me that community is key for me, at least in my opinion, because without your local community and local friends and family, then you can feel quite lost as you don't have that physical connection. And that I believe is quite important, especially for people that are more isolated. Like some writers and some artists and some creators, from what I've noticed, seem to, not all the time, but some of the time, create from their pain. And so I believe that it's healing, but also triggering for them as well as myself. But yeah, sorry.
Okay, can you elaborate, Melantha, on this particular poem and other poems that you've written? Is this reflective of the style that you like to write in? Or are there a variety of different styles? Talk to us all about your poetic style.
Of course. So my poetic style does change varying the poem. So for individuals together, it took me a couple of weeks to a couple of days to write because it wasn't rhyming, or at least it doesn't have the main elements of rhyme, and it's more rhythm based and it's less what I'm used to doing. As a poet, I find rhyming to be a very key aspect for me personally. It doesn't have Poems don't have to rhyme, but I just have that personal preference for it. It just makes it flow like the waves, at least easier for me. It's not jagged. So I would say that my poetic style would mainly be rhyme based as well as similes and metaphors. So I don't always like to be obvious about what I'm saying.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that would be consistent throughout all my poems.
Mhm. So you kind of tap into that like mysterious element of poetry where you're elaborating on something, but it can kind of have a couple other different connotations and a couple meanings. And you do you leave that up to the reader to interpret that?
Yes, I don't want to like spoon feed the reader, because as much as the reader may want to be spoon fed, quotation marks, maybe not. Spoon feeding is like giving it to them firsthand, saying like, this is what it is. That's my opinion what spoon feeding is. But in relations to poetry, I find spoon feeding to be less interpretational, and I find poems that have more interpretations and more meaning behind them than just the outward view to be quite inspiring, because it must have took a lot of effort and a lot of time, it certainly has for me, to be able to come up with similes and metaphors to, pardon me, to, sorry, to basically write down and articulate different meanings through those words, because it does take time and effort to do that. And I can respect that from other poets and other writers and for myself.
Right, yes. Let me ask you, Melantha, do you have any little tips and techniques in terms of when you're writing, in terms of rhyming, in terms of the metaphors, the similes? I feel like that's kind of a way of thinking, right? It's a way of kind of looking and interacting with the world. So when you're in that space and you're writing, do you have little ways to kind of help bring that out, or does it just come out automatically? What is the process for you?
For me personally, it used to have to be like, for example, looking at a lamp. Is the lamp bright? Is the lamp not on or off? It's like originally I had to like really focus in on the adjectives and on like the way that I would speak or write in this case, and the way that my words could have different meanings behind them. But nowadays, in my present, it flows naturally for me. So I suppose if I had to give a tip or a trick, it would definitely be look at objects, maybe like a lamp, maybe a bin slash trash can, maybe a keyboard, maybe just a lamp or a light or a wall, and try to describe it without saying its actual word. So for example, a wall, don't say it's a wall, say it's a flat surface
Mhm.
that goes upwards. See, that for me personally, um, is not being obvious, um, but you're actually still telling the reader what it is without being so obvious it's like spoon feeding.
I love that. It's like looking at something in a completely different and new way, making it really fresh.
Hmm.
Talk to us about your subject matter. What other subjects do you tend to write about, and how has your poetry evolved since you've been writing?
So when I was much younger, when I was about 15, well, I say much younger, it's only about 2, 3 years. When I was 15, I would, um, when it came to my writing style, it was quite a challenge, like I said previously, when it came to adjectives. So I was more obvious with my writing. So say it's a tree, it's a plant, instead of it's a green animal coming to life, it's a blossoming head. Not so obvious. Um, my process has been quite challenging, considering I've been through more traumatic events during my life, during my time of writing. So I'm still dealing with my current trauma when it came to things that, if you want to know, I will expand later on. But yeah, my process has been always developing, always changing. My genres, though, are very varied. So sometimes I may think of a story and then write it down like on a piece of paper, and then take the elements of that story, take some words, and then pop it into a poem. But other times it's something that I've noticed, maybe a conversation I've had, it all ranges. I don't like to fix on one thing. I like to just be broad and open with my creativity.
And as far as your inspiration goes, what really inspires you? What do you gravitate towards? You already expressed that it's very important to you to connect with others, to connect with the world, all sorts of connecting. So in terms of inspiration, where do you draw inspiration from? What do you resonate with? In addition to,
I I resonate with my family. They have to be my biggest inspiration for sure. It's kind of cheesy saying that, but it's true. I've never been able to understand poetry myself per se. So when I've looked at different writers and I've read their poems, I'm just like dot dot dot. What are you saying? I don't understand. And that just might be the autism within me. I'm not sure, but my family has definitely, especially my father. He's quite a writer and he's quite fluid and open with his words and his opinions. Pardon me. So that's where I've drawn the majority of my inspiration from. But outside of the family, I would say nature as and cities and just looking around, because I find inspiration to be anywhere and everywhere. So even on the most mundane things like an apple, the floor, a piece of grass, the sky, all things that a majority of us have learned to just take possibly for granted. Maybe not, it depends the person. But the point is that people, and myself especially, find inspiration from everything. So not just in family, not just in friends, but for everything around us, from our own opinions and reflections. And I suppose that's the case for me personally, because I've become more open-minded. As a young child, I was more closed-minded, thus I only liked what I liked and that was that. But now I'm more open with everything, in my opinion. I feel as though I'm more fluid with my thinking and my thoughts. That's why I get open inspiration from everything around me.
Mhm. And then that translates into your poetry.
Mm-hmm.
That's really beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I love that openness. That's great. Um,
Thank you.
in the creative zone, Melantha, and you're writing your poetry, do you create a specific environment? Is your environment important to you? Is it not important to you? And if so, what kind of environment kind of helps you with that fluidity, or is it just completely open and it doesn't really matter? You could be inside, you could be outside, here, there. Talk to us about that.
For me personally, I don't really depend on my environment. Though, if I had to decide an environment, I would definitely have somewhere of peaceful and tranquility. So maybe like by a waterfall or just inside by myself. That's what I would mostly prefer, but it's not a necessary tool for me to write with.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't necessarily need a room, a wall, or whatever someone may need to help inspire them and help them to create. I don't necessarily need that, but if I had a preference, I'd place my preference with somewhere quieter so my mind can flow freer instead of being busied up and attentive to the noises and the sounds and the smells and the tastes and the environment around them of like a busy shop, for example. I personally find those quite overwhelming, but that's just me personally.
Mm-hmm. All right, Melantha, we still have a few more minutes with our show for today. What else would you like to share with us that we haven't discussed yet?
I would honestly like to share my book. It's a self-published book, and I made this when I was 15, 16. It's not the best, it's quite thin, as you can see, and I have it online on Amazon. If you type in Hidden Journeys, a 4-Ed poem book by Melantha, you should be able to find this cover, and it's of a lotus being held in hands. And Individuals Together actually comes from that book because it was the first book I was doing and have done. And if you want a physical copy, then you can always email me. It's all lowercase at melantha.r.b@gmail.com. And Melantha spelled, let me quickly check because I completely forgot how to spell my own name. melantha.r.b@gmail.com. I'm pretty sure everyone knows how to spell Gmail, but who knows? I would also like to say, if that's okay, a little bit of advice when it came to writing and making a book. This is also in my book. It has like 4 main points: plan, think, edit, and spend. So plan is like basically, to sum plan up, is to have an idea and then plan the idea. So as in expand, make a mind map of all the thoughts that you have with this idea. And that's be the first thing. And then think. So once you have that plan, you definitely need to think. And once you're doing with your thinking, you can also begin writing. And that would be the edit stage, which like you're writing, you're editing constantly as you're moving along, you're flowing with your creativity. Though personally, I think you should write it all down, or at least as much as you can, and then go back to edit it. Because if you're editing as you're trying to write, it can stop the flow, or at least pause the creativity. So the creativity might go nah and leave, and that can always be frustrating. And then spend, not just spending monetary wise, but spend just time reflecting and pausing from the book or pausing from your poem, and spend some time for yourself or doing something else, and then come back and spend time on the book. As for me, I find spending time on something else and then coming back to it gives me open eyes and makes me see it from a different perspective. So then I can edit it, think, and plan further. And I suppose that would be in a loop, but that's just me personally, and that's my advice.
Thank you for those closing comments. That's great. Great advice. Melantha, thank you so much for being with us today. And we're grateful for everyone that has watched today with our current episode. And we invite you to our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk. And please be on the lookout for new poet interviews. Anything else you'd like to share with us before we end the recording? Any current projects that you'd like to share with us?
I'm currently making my second book, which is called Shadow Journeys, and it should be out sometime either this year or early next year. And once again, if you wanted to learn more about that, you could always email me at melantha.r.b@gmail.com.
Wonderful. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to thank you and thank everyone for listening. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. We so appreciate you sharing with us and your candor and letting us get to know you as a poet and reading a selection of one of your poems. All right. Thank you so much. And again, thank you everyone for watching. Until the next episode of Poetry and Talk, be well, be blessed. Thank you, everyone.